Welcome back, everybody. In this episode, we're going to be discussing a paper that looks at macular edema in an underserved population. Our guest expert for this episode is Dr. Edward Chu, who is an optometrist at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Long Beach, and the Journal Scan editor for the Academy's journal Clinical Insights in Eye Care. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you for having me, Mika. Thanks for
All
the
right, so this
invitation.
I know this article is called Clinically Significant Macular Edema in an Underserved Population Association with Demographic Factors and Hemoglobin A1C by Parimi and colleagues, which was published in the Academy's journal Optometry and Vision Science. So, what was the study looking at?
So essentially, it was focused on the association between the presence of clinically significant macular edema in the presence of exudates and an underserved population from the same geographical location, which is Alameda County, down in your neighborhood.
Yeah, I am in Alameda County right now. So why is clinically significant macular edema important to study?
I think all optometrists are aware that diabetic complications can lead to vision loss, and that could lead to future vision impairment. So it's essential, especially for these underserved populations who may not have access to eye care, to hopefully identify barriers to identification of CSME and make sure they get the appropriate treatment so we can reduce the possibility of vision loss.
All right. So tell us a little bit about how this study was designed.
So they used teleretinal imaging, I believe it's called IPAX, and they took non-stereo digital photos, and they used the screening criteria, basically exudates within a disc diameter of the fovea. Obviously, they didn't have stereo photos, so that was the main criteria where they used to screen. They had a good number of subjects, around 2,000, four main ethnic groups: African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, and Asian. Average age was around early 50s. And unfortunately, this population, the control was non-ideal. About 55.6 had an A1C above 7, and the average A1C was actually around 8.26. So
I guess that makes sense, right? Underserved population. And so what were their findings?
So overall, 147 subjects, or about 7.36%, had CSME. African Americans had the highest proportion of patients who had CSME, around 10.4%, and that was followed by Asians at 8%. Interestingly, they found that with every 1% increase in hemoglobin A1C, the odds of the presence of CSME went up by a whopping 26.5%. So, on average, it was 8.5, but I'm sure there are individuals who were much higher as far as their A1C measurements. Interestingly, they did note that they did not include patients that had CSME secondary to heme, so the number might actually be higher if you think about it. Let me see, look at my notes here. That rate is pretty high. I looked at a recent study out of Survey of Ophthalmology that used OCT guidelines, and their rate was 5.5%. So you would think with OCT, they're probably catching more because they're getting detailed scans.
Yeah.
And it was lower. So, as far as potentially higher numbers that have CSME, I'm sure this is an underestimate overall for this population.
Yeah, and I would guess that's because this population is underserved. But you're right. I'm glad you brought that up because it was interesting to me, you can catch so much more CSME with an OCT, but most of the telehealth screening that are used are photos.
Right.
Which requires a read and all that kind of stuff. But did the study find any other differences between ethnic groups?
Yeah, they actually found that Asians and African Americans had a higher probability of higher levels of A1C compared to Hispanics and Caucasians, and as a result, probably a greater probability of having CSME. So it's interesting. I don't think they came up with a specific reason or a theory, but that's an interesting trend.
That is. And what about age? Are we like everything else? Is it worse as everyone gets older?
Yeah, they didn't actually find any significant association in this study between age and CSME, but they also didn't really look at disease duration. So they kind of admitted that could be a limiting factor for, why they weren't able to find any kind of correlation there as well.
That makes sense. So Last question. Is there anything that this study is teaching us that we should take into our primary care practices?
Well, I mean, I think detection is of the utmost importance, and there are barriers to for certain ethnic groups to get care, unfortunately. But I think identifying the barriers, identifying the demographic groups that are underserved, we can do all we can to make sure we educate them on getting regular eye screenings at least, or eye exams if it's possible, and making sure that we try our best to detect, vision-threatening diabetic complications as soon as possible and refer them. I also came across an article in ophthalmology that was looking at 20 years of incidence and prevalence of diabetic retinal disease. So the encouraging thing there was, while diabetes, about 1.2 million people are being diagnosed every year pretty steadily. But fortunately, the number of people who have proliferative diabetic retinopathy and CSME has actually not gone up with that number. And I think that's a testament to the medications and treatments that are out there, the rise of anti-VEGF. So the sooner we can get these underserved populations into our eye clinics and give them eye exams, the more likely we're able to get them the treatment they need so they don't have these vision-threatening complications. So,
Excellent. Well, we'll end it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Chu, for joining me today.
yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks.